I'm Amy Robinson, News Director at WCMU Public Media. Thank you for joining us for this Facebook Live webinar. We are here to talk about the very important issue of race, which has even come more to the forefront for Northern Michigan after an incident in Leelanau County. So our guests today are Eric Carlson with the Leelanau Enterprise. He's a local reporter who, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, you've been covering this area pretty much forever?
Well, since about 1998, when I retired after a 25-year career in the Marines as a combat correspondent.
All right, very good. And so you have a good sense, and you can share with us some of the local, thoughts and the local personalities involved with this. We appreciate you joining us. And also joining us today, we have Anthony Lewis from the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. Anthony, we're delighted you could join us today. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Well, my background, I've been with I serve as the Director of Business Community Affairs for the Department of Civil Rights. And one of the things in my background is I've been with the department, closing in on 20 years now. So I've seen a lot of changes here in the state of Michigan, and I've had the opportunity to meet a great many people and travel the state in terms of now, in my position now, especially doing presentations and discussing all different concerns. Most importantly, now I've been working with different law enforcement agencies and building those relationships with different community organizations and members of the community, especially now, given the times we're in now. But yes, my background is I started out many moons ago as an investigator, investigating cases of unlawful discrimination throughout the state, and then transitioned into our community relations, which we now call Community Engagement Division. And now I'm blessed to serve as the director of that division. And so I have a wonderful team that we work throughout the state and trying to educate and also trying to educate and support all of the different members of the community in the state on their efforts to eradicate unlawful discrimination. So that's really at the core of what we do.
All right. Well, we're happy to have you both here. So let's jump right into the issue at hand and the way it began. And so, Eric, I'm going to come to you a little bit to give us the background on this incident in Leelanau County where a road commissioner used a racial slur very publicly and then continued to defend himself in the use of that term, if I have that correct. Tell us about what happened.
Well, it's important to understand that this road commissioner had been elected to the board in November 2018 by the people of Leelanau County. His last name happens to coincide with the name of the road on which the road commission is located. He beat a fellow who is a licensed professional engineer and spent years working for the neighboring Grand Traverse County Road Commission. Who was a Democrat, and he won that election fair and square, but was clearly a disruptive influence for more than a year on that road commission, something we reported on regularly.
What kind of disruptive influence?
He routinely used obscene language at road commission meetings. He would often engage in arguments and deriding members of the road commission staff and other commissioners. Four top officials at the Leelanau County Road Commission abruptly quit their jobs, resigned, and it's believed that a lot of it had to do with his corrosive influence on that particular road commission. When we went to the COVID environment and the meetings began occurring on a telephone feed that the public could call in and make public comment, everybody could listen in. He would take the opportunity before the meeting was being recorded to put all kinds of divisive thoughts out there. And we did not report too many of them because they occurred before the meeting was called to order. However, I was listening in, as I do regularly, to one of those meetings just a couple of weeks ago, and he allowed us how he wasn't wearing a mask, a face mask, because of those, and then he used the N-word to describe folks in Detroit. that the COVID-19 pandemic was all about those N words. And the chair of the road commission said, "You can't say that." And then he had to call the meeting to order because it was time to start the meeting. And finally, I decided, no, it's time to report some of what he's saying before the meeting convenes that we can overhear. And we did that. And of course, a year of covering the bad things he said about members of the road commission and the stupid comments he made at road commission meetings didn't raise too many eyebrows, but obviously this did. We put it on the front page and it gained a lot of people's attention.
And yet, when he was questioned by media, he stood by his statement.
That's just the kind of guy he is. He said what he meant, and by golly, he's sticking to it. And yeah, that was made very clear. And you know, the good news is that the other members of the road commission sent him a very simply worded letter that said, "We just don't condone what you've been doing and what you've been saying, and we'd like you to resign." And he did. But he says it's mostly because he's such a dedicated public servant and he didn't want to create any more burden for the road commission because they have to hire a new managing director, the second in as many years, who left abruptly in April, probably because of pressure from him.
So let's bring Anthony into the conversation. Anthony, you heard the description of what happened, and I know you've researched it some on your own. This seems like just such a surprisingly blatant incident where this kind of thing is stated publicly. Give us perspective from what you see. Were you surprised when you heard about this?
Well, I have to say that while on the one hand, I was surprised, yes, that a public official would be so blatant to, in a public forum such as this, you know, an elected official in such a forum as this would be so comfortable in uttering, you know, a racial slur and what some believe is the mother of all racial slurs, but, you know, to so comfortably, you know, utter that. And then when questioned, you know, or confronted, you know, stand by and show no remorse in the utterance. And I think that to me was, you know, was surprising. But on the other hand, in this climate, it wasn't surprising, unfortunately, because what you have sometimes is a manifestation of a lot of feelings and a lot of utterances, a lot of feelings right now. Especially by those who I like to call in the dominant culture. And so there's a lot of feelings, you know, right now, and a lot of folks who are feeling threatened, you know, who are feeling threatened in certain ways and feeling their lifestyle, so to speak, being threatened. And I think that what you have is this is just a manifestation of those fears, you know, of those, you know, and of those feelings. So as I said, I was surprised, as I said, but unfortunately, not as surprised, because if you think about it, just this weekend you had demonstrations in Kalamazoo, and you know, with an organization I believe called the Proud Boys, and even with some anecdotal kind of you know, kind of incidents that have come to my attention, you know, from my contacts there, from my information from folks I'm involved with there. There's anecdotal incidents of the utterance of that particular slur regularly, you know, and openly. And so I think that, you know, and I think that the one thing is that the surprise is in the, oh, wow, I can't believe he actually said it in this forum, rather than I can't believe he said it. So,
is there a way, you talk about kind of the culture supporting, or at least not challenging sometimes racial statements. Is there a way you can gauge the racist level of a community?
well, no, I don't think there's a way. I don't think there's kind of a racism meter, you know, out there. I don't think there's a way that you can really gauge necessarily the racism of the community, because I think that most communities that, you know, I don't believe any community is a monolithic group of people. You know, I think that it's, you know, that's what makes our communities here in the state of Michigan. That's what makes all of our communities here in the state of Michigan great, is because they're a collection of individual cultures and a collection of individual folks who bring their own ideas and ideologies, you know, to their, you know, to that community and their own upbringings. And so I don't believe that you could have, a meter, but I do believe you can have a comfort meter. And what I mean by that is there's a certain level of comfort that you have to feel in order to utter that, which means that in other areas, this particular commissioner was not challenged. So I think that what happens is that there was a comfort level now in being able to utter that, because this wasn't the first time it was uttered. I'm sure this was the first time it was uttered in this forum, but I think that because previously there were no challenges previously, there became a comfort level in now being able to utter it in any forum. And I think that you can gauge that in terms of comfort level, but I don't think that because I'm a firm believer that while one person should not, one person and one utterance should not define an entire community, because then we're doing the same things we will be doing the same things that we dislike about all the other communities, how one community is defined by an individual act or one individual. So I don't, like I said, but I do think it's a level of comfort within a community that this particular commissioner and those who are in that commissioner's circle had a level of comfort with that particular slur, obviously.
Eric, how does that sound to you in the context of Leelanau County? Do you believe that you have seen this comfort level that Anthony talks about? What is kind of the culture that you see?
I agree with his assessment of how things like that occur in a community like ours. I can tell you that I took my own little poll immediately after the incident occurred by confirming what I had just heard with other people who were actually in the room. 2 out of 3 of them would confirm to me off the record, only off the record, as long as I didn't use their names and put their names in the paper, that they had heard what they had heard and they condemned it. So finally, the chairman of the meeting finally said, yes, not only did I hear it, I heard what you heard, but we have to condemn it. 2 others did not immediately do that. So that tells me something about how comfortable people are, not only with uttering those kinds of words, but with just letting them pass, with not saying anything about it and wishing nobody'd said anything about it.
And yet now the county commission is looking to say something about it, and they're really struggling to find the words, aren't they? Tell us about that.
Yeah, they really are. The county administrator, it became obvious that they needed to say something. They set up this road commission with additional members that resulted in this particular commissioner being elected to office. And it was up to them to go on record as a community to say, we're against this. A resolution that the county administrator put together pretty much echoed a lot of the same kind of anti-racist statements you might expect to see in any community from any body of elected leaders. But it seemed to be maybe a bridge too far for a few of them. One of our commissioners suggested that we really need to consider the incidence of abortion in the African-American community, because that's really the worst form of racism, the fact that so many Black babies are dying, as she said. And another commissioner echoed that and cited some statistics about the incidence of abortion in the African-American community, and also suggested that there are other forms of racism, such as calling cops pigs, that should be cited as an example of racism. And this was embedded in the course of about a 5-hour county board executive meeting, where they're not expected to take any action, but are expected to discuss their ideas thoroughly before voting on an action that they should take this coming Tuesday night, tomorrow night.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that this came up was interesting. There were some novel ideas that I heard about what ought to go into a anti-racism resolution, and I reported them, and that too has gained a lot of attention.
Well, and how how does the county propose it write an anti-racism resolution without using the word racism? This was an issue that came up.
I think ultimately they will include the word racism in it. I think that I know for a fact that on Tuesday, not Tuesday, forgive me, on Thursday, the county administrator sat down with one of the commissioners who wanted that word removed, and another commissioner whose views on the subject comport with perhaps those of Anthony's and mine, that you really do need to address racism in an anti-racist resolution. And I think what's going to happen Tuesday night at the County Board of Commissioners meeting is we're going to see a very simple and stripped down version of an anti-racist resolution, not unlike the one we saw from the Road Commission that basically said, we're against it. We wish people wouldn't say the N-word, and we're all against racism. Love and kisses, Leelanau County Board of Commissioners. I think that's probably what we're going to see.
Anthony, is that enough?
I think, well, the short answer is, given how open the commissioner was in saying that, and like I said, obviously, it's probably something that has been stated previously. The short answer from my perspective would be no. That's not enough to just simply say, hey, we're against it. Nothing to see here. Everybody go home. So I think that you do need to clearly state, what you are. See, I think oftentimes you need to clearly state just as much what you are for as what you are against. And I think that that's what you need to have, an effective statement. You not only need to state what you're against, but you need to state what you are for. And I found the discussion during the commission meeting, the discussion was, was very, it was very informative, but it was also, there was also a great deal of what I like to call irony in the discussion, because the root cause of having the discussion and the resolution in the first place was the utterance of a racial slur by an elected official. And then, but yet you want to remove the word race or racial from equity and race from the resolution. You had a commissioner who wanted to remove that from the resolution. So I felt that was a bit of irony there, because that's the reason why you're having the discussion in the first place. So you have to state, you can't simply state, what you are against. You have to also state what you are for if it's going to be effective. And also, I think that, once again, I move to that, comfortable and uncomfortable, because once again, the discussion of race is a very uncomfortable discussion. It is a very uncomfortable discussion, especially for people who are not used to having that discussion, who have never even had to confront such a discussion. It is very difficult. It is very uncomfortable, but it's a discussion nonetheless that needs to be had. And I think that there was a lot of enlightening also, because one thing that struck me was when the rationale was, well, we don't have those issues of disparities and those kinds of things. And then you had another commissioner immediately state, well, yes, we do. And that struck me, because you have someone that and this is a natural occurrence because when, in that you have one committee that does not see, because they have not had to see those disparities. They have not had to be confronted and see that. And yet you have another commissioner that says, no, we do have these disparities. We may not have the racial disparities that are spoken of here, but we have economic, and we started bringing up all the other different disparities. And I think that, to me, that's part of that discussion. That's part of what you need to have. That's part of the discourse, and understanding that, no, we can't simply ignore, this is all encompassed, but you can't also ignore what I like to say, the elephant in the room, is that the reason why you're there is because you had a discussion, you had a pro commission, utter a slur. And to think that that is just one person, uttering that, there are others that did not, that at some point or during the course of their interactions did not confront that previously. So while I hesitate to broad brush everyone, I also am not naive enough to think that it's just that one person with that view in the community. So that's why you have to name it, you have to state it, and you have to be direct. You have to be direct with it.
Eric, is there an appetite in Leelanau for that kind of direct resolution that talks not only about what they oppose, but what they support? From what you're telling us earlier, it sounds like maybe not.
Well, maybe not on a majority of the Leelanau County Board of Commissioners, but elsewhere in the community, there is an appetite for it. It's important to point out that here in Leelanau County, we have a population that's 94% white, 4% Native American, 3% Hispanic, and just a fraction of 1%, about a quarter of 1% Black. And most of those are mixed households. Some of those are also mixed with our Native American tribe, the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians. So although we do have some diversity in Leelanau County, the issues of race that people brush up against all the time in other communities downstate is not something that most commissioners have been exposed to throughout the course of their lives. The commissioner who uttered the racist comment at the road commission meeting has lived here his whole life, is a farmer. You know, the people who are wondering whether we ought to adopt an anti-racism resolution that includes anything about racism are folks who didn't even go away to college. So no, they're not accustomed to being confronted on this set of issues. On the other hand, we have a couple of groups in the county who are intent on doing something. One is the Northern Michigan Anti-Racist Task Force, which incidentally is headed up by a lot of members of the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians. Also there is a new Recall Eckerly. He was the road commissioner who resigned, but that group has remained alive. And they apparently in just the last few days have been organizing and raising money to begin a kind of education campaign on this whole set of issues. So yes, there are people in the community who want to talk about this. The extent to which the Leelanau County Board of Commissioners is going to talk about this going forward is a good question. Read all about it in this week's Enterprise.
Anthony, is there go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, and thank you for the, in terms of demographics, because I was just about to bring up, the demographics in the context of, because I think that, we are conditioned to believe that when we hear the word race, when we see the word racial or race, you see my picture next to it, right? So we are conditioned, for that. And I think that and so when you have someone says, well, we don't have those issues. No, well, you have to understand that's because we've been conditioned that word is associated and only means one in particular, one group of folks or one, and I think that understanding the demographics, no, that encompasses such a large, that encompasses everyone, because like I said, one thing about us here, one thing about us state, everyone has a quote race, a quote unquote race. And so that that means we are all encompassed. And so you have communities, like Leelanau County that, that does have, a great deal of diversity, even 94%, but you still have a diverse population. And also, one thing I also want to stress is that the population of Michigan is changing. The demographics in all different areas are changing. I think the best leaders are those who are forward thinking, those who not only recognize who we are as a community, but those who recognize who we want to be as a community moving forward, and understanding the demographic shifts in the state. Forward thinkers, you have to understand, because you don't want to be just, this is who we are, but no, this is also who we want to be moving forward. And I think that's also something that needs to be understood when drafting things like, things like resolutions and those kind of things, because it's really not about who we are in this moment. It's also about who we want to be and what we want to project.
Eric, when we look at whatever the resolution is that the Leelanau County Commission will come up with, we presume tomorrow, whether it be the very short "we're opposed to racism," or whether they perhaps dig a little deeper and add to it, how much impact do you realistically think this will have? How much can policy impact a culture, a community, the people in that culture who maybe have a hard time with that idea?
I think the impact is going to come in November when people vote. Every one of these commissioners is up for re-election in just a couple of months. For the first time in history, all 7 Leelanau County Commissioner seats have Democrats running for them. As recently as a decade ago, they were all Republicans. So I think that the upcoming discussion and a more energized electorate in Leelanau County, elsewhere in the state and nationally, is going to end up having the biggest impact on how things play out here in Leelanau County. I think it's interesting to point out that just 2 years ago, the Leelanau County Board of Commissioners was asked to consider adopting Indigenous Americans Day in lieu of Columbus Day, and wasn't able to do that. They did eventually set another day as Indigenous Peoples Day, that was an interesting discussion they had, and I think our neighbors on the reservation in Suttons Bay Township, the Grand Traverse Band, are going to be playing a big role in some of the changes going forward.
Are there Native Americans running for office in November?
Not this time
your
around.
county?
Not so far. We were the only news medium on the planet, quite frankly, to cover the recent election of the tribal council and a new tribal chairman. There was really quite a turnover on the tribal council and among the philosophy of the tribal chairman in an election that was just certified Friday. They are a sovereign nation. Occasionally we'll see a tribal member run for a school board, a few other local positions like that, but I don't know that they're going to do anything other than show up at public comment occasionally at county board meetings.
I want to take a moment and acknowledge that we have viewers on Facebook Live. We have viewers on our webcast that had registered for it. If you have questions, feel free to share your questions in the question answer box for Zoom or through Facebook Live, and we will forward those to our panelists. Anthony, I want to toss the question now to you. As you've worked with this throughout the state and over time, how much of an impact can policy have, can a resolution have on changing the culture of a community?
Well, policy itself, the policy itself is nothing more than words on a piece of paper. That's first and foremost, policy itself. So really it's reinforcement of the ideals expressed in the policy is really where the force of that particular policy happens. And I think that comes from the community. And as you said, in November, and in November, so if the community itself, let's say you have, expresses, this is who we want to be, and this particular representatives who are in place now don't represent who we want to be and what we want to project, then that is a level of accountability in terms of, what for a policy or an ordinance or whatever. That is where that to me is where the accountability comes from, and where the change happens is from the community. Because as I said, those are, policies, and those are words on a piece of paper, because, policies, as you know, there's the policy and then there's the practice. So, I mean, we could have a resolution, and resolutions are great, but resolutions hang on the wall. And then it's up to the people to live up to the ideals of that particular resolution. So yes, so while I think it's good to state it, it's always good to state it because you can refer back to it, and it's always good to state it. But no, the real work itself is going to be on the ground by the members of the community and living up to that and working towards that.
Eric, what is your sense of the you mentioned this changing not electric, but the changing candidates in your county race. Have you done any polling? Do you know their likelihood of success for a Democrat to be elected in this largely Republican area?
I think the chances are as good as they've ever been. The county board now is deeply split. There are 3 Democrats and 4 Republicans. And the votes, when they're controversial, generally end up going that way. There is one Republican on the board who is often a swing vote, who's kind of a moderate. So things can often go either way. I think it's entirely possible that the Dems could achieve a majority on the board. They're close already. They just need to flip one seat, and things could change in a big way fairly rapidly.
What do you think the takeaway from this should be? As you know, Eric, it's gained widespread notice. It's gained widespread attention. People are certainly paying attention to what's happening with this racism issue in Leelanau County. As you sit really at the center of it, having watched a lot of the players for years, what do you think the takeaway should be?
I wish I knew. I wish I were not so deeply engrossed in following the day-to-day activities that sometimes I could take a step back and actually provide a better picture of what's going on. My publisher and I did write an editorial this week that expressed disappointment that the Leelanau County Board of Commissioners couldn't come up with something fairly simple that let people know we're not a bunch of racists here in Leelanau County. They were not able to do that quickly, and we wish they would, and we're disappointed. That's about as far as my thinking has gone on that so far. I've got a Suttons Bay Village Council meeting to cover tonight, a Bingham Township Board meeting, and another Road Commission meeting to cover tomorrow. So in my spare time, I'll try to figure out how to solve this whole set of issues, but I don't know how successful I'll be.
And let me follow up, Anthony. I'm going to ask you that question in just a minute too. But first, I want to take a question from Zoom. Gretchen saying, thank you for this much needed enlightening discussion. Eric, do you know if any Black or Indigenous people of color are being included in creating the Commission's anti-racist statement?
I'm not aware that they are. I don't, quite frankly, in terms of African Americans, I don't know who they'd call, who lives here. There's a fella who's a well-known former teacher up at Northport Public School. His kids and my kids played together, but he moved out of the county, Marshall Collins, and he's been playing a big role in the anti-racism task force, but he's not he's not one of our constituents anymore. He moved to Grand Traverse County, so I don't know that they're calling him up. They might call up somebody from the tribe, but they're in flux right now. They're doing a big turnover in the tribal government. So the answer is no, probably they're not.
And I have a curious question. You mentioned Marshall Collins as the gentleman who lived in the county and moved out. You have not mentioned the name of the road commissioner who made the racial statement, even just casually as part of your comments. Why is that?
His name is Tom Eckerly, and forgive me, that was not intentional. Who was that kid who shot a bunch of people down in South Carolina? We don't mention his name either. In any event, his name is Tom Eckerly. There is an Eckerly Road. It's a few blocks long. It runs right in front of the Road Commission headquarters, and folks are suggesting we change that name to Black Lives Matter Road, and some people are trying to do that.
And what kind of response is that getting?
I think people are amused. I think some people are enthused about it, and it's the most creative idea I've heard so far, and in fact, it might be the only thing that actually changes.
Anthony, then over to you as we look at this issue, and we just heard a few more interesting sidebars with a call to change the road name, and that there have not been people of color working, as far as we know, on a resolution about racism. And we look at this small community that's really embroiled at this point in this issue. What, if anything, do you see as kind of the takeaway? What should we perhaps learn from this? What should they learn from this?
Well, I think first, the first takeaway is uh, really understanding and knowing that we live in a global society. That's first. Because because I think that you understand that the days of being able to operate in so-called small town America, those days are over. And the understanding that that one person, the actions of one person, can unfortunately define an entire community, especially when you're unprepared for a response. Because I think that Eric spoke about how it was difficulty in crafting a response, so that we're not looked at in this way. And I think that's one, is that preparation and understanding that, we're in a global society, and just because, and the things that happen, even if they happen in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the impact is still felt nationwide. And I think that that's one of the takeaways, is to always understand that just because something has not happened or has not been publicized, that it has happened in your community does not mean it has no effect on your community. That should be one of the main takeaways. And also, as I spoke before, about being forward thinking about what do you want to project, who you want to be, because just because this hasn't happened in your community does not mean it can't, and does not mean something similar may happen, or there may be some other unfortunate interaction. So that's another thing that you have to understand, that just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it can't, happen in your communities. And also in terms of who is at the table. And I think that's a very, very important in terms of who is at the table. Because I happen to know Marshall, and Marshall is an unbelievable resource. And I wish that they would reach out to Marshall. But I have to say this, in that oftentimes it becomes difficult when you are the only, so to speak. And what I mean is, you're called upon in communities. You're often called upon as the voice of, and it becomes tiring. It becomes draining, because you're often called upon to be the voice of and to speak for an entire community that is not a monolithic community. And so I think but I think it's very important to have people at the table, and that was one of the things, like I said, as we move forward, I was going to, in terms of suggestions, in terms of putting forth a resolution, is have people at the table, because I think it's excellent to do your research in terms of finding out what other municipalities are doing, because that's the first thing you want to do, is your research, what's out there. But also, you have a rich community within your own. So reach out to those folks in your community. And guess what? If you don't know them, this is the perfect time to reach out and get to know them. So I said, because nothing happens without agitation. And now your community has been agitated by one of its own because of statements that were made by Mr. Ecker. So this is the perfect time to reach out and get to know those members of your community and involve them in the process. Because that's how now you will be able to project what's in your community, and involve them in the process. So I think, like I said, so that's the takeaway, is that not only is that you're in a global society, but also see the difficulty in devising a resolution when the people at the table who the resolution is about or resolution is directed to are not at the table and involved in devising the resolution. So I think that's also takeaway, is bring more people to the table.
All right, very good. Eric, I want to come back to you real briefly, just to say, and to our audience, this is to me a great example too of the importance of local news, of having a reporter in the community who is following these things, who's covering the issues. And Eric, as I listen to you talk about the various boards and meetings and commissions that are meeting in the Leelanau area, you know them, the commissions, the players, and the mechanism behind that. And not just for this kind of very heavy and serious issue, but for everything that's affecting your community. I'm just going to, say briefly, yeah, support local journalism, because this is how these kind of issues are known. These issues, for better or for worse, that happen where we live every day, is to have journalists there, like Eric, every day, following up and knowing the players and reporting on it. So I encourage, those who are watching this to support local journalism, because it's having a hard time right now, and it's so important. And Eric, I'm sure you're feeling both of those sides, that it is difficult and it is important.
Yeah, I agree. And thanks for the plug. Um, I think it's worth noting that this is actually not the first time this whole set of issues has come up, not about journalism, but about Black Lives Matter, for example. Just a few weeks ago, one of our 4 public school district superintendents sent a letter out to parents about talking to them about COVID and talking to them about Black Lives Matter and some things that they could do at home, like demonstrate with Black Lives Matter and support the ACLU and so on and so forth. And I read that and thought, okay, I don't know how that's going to go over. It didn't go over well universally in the community. There were calls for her immediate resignation. So yeah, it remains a struggle to get everybody on the same page here in Leelanau County. There aren't that many, as much as I and Tony would like the Leelanau County Board of Commissioners to call on somebody of color to help them put that resolution together. Frankly, I don't know who they'd call. I mean, other than Marshall, and they're probably not going to call him. I can count on the fingers of one hand the numbers of African-American families who live year-round in Leelanau County, and people just aren't used to dealing with this whole set of issues.
Do you suppose the commission would be open to reaching out to some of the Native Americans, that they have even formed a group, you said, and have an interest in this issue?
Yeah, I think they have, or they have an interest in doing that. I don't know that they will. I don't know that they see this as cut from the same cloth, and I don't know that that they're going to have the time to do that, quite frankly. I think that they're facing a deadline of tomorrow night to come up with some language. They're going to keep it short and simple and try to get this across their desk as quickly as possible.
All right, very good. Well, Eric, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We do appreciate your time. That's Eric Carlson, reporter with the Leelanau Enterprise. Thank you also to Anthony Lewis. Anthony, thank you for joining us from out of state, as it turns out today, but through the wonder of technology, you can be with us today. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you very much for having me.
And Anthony Lewis is with the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. We also thank you for your time on this Facebook Live and Zoom webinar, and we wish you a good day. I'm Amy Robinson with WCMU News.